The chance to shape your future is here. Learn and connect with exciting new opportunities. Are you ready for the next step?
So I guess I start. Can I have my first slide? Thank you very much. So good afternoon. I'm Jill Knowles of Maisie Boland Associates, and I'm going to talk for the first half of this session on simply a matter of process, building operational resilience in a time of crisis. And what I'm going to talk about specifically is what I think businesses need to do before introducing the tech in order to get the absolute most benefit out of that tech. So a little bit of background first. As I say, I work for a company called Maisie Boland Associates. I'm the co-founder and director. And if you have to bracket what we do, we would say we help with your people. So we provide retained HR services to make sure you're legally compliant, and we can either do that on a monthly basis or we can do it as and when you need it. We help with people development and leadership training. We do projects such as investigations and restructuring. The bit that I focus on within the business is the lean principles, so helping the people focus on what really adds value. And what happens then is the team is that much more invested and you can get that much more out of them and they're enjoying their role more. We're also health and safety qualified, and we can provide the services of an occupational health nurse if required. So back to the topic. What do you need to do in order to build operational resilience? You need the ability to react quickly to change. You need to be able to divert your processes from what they're currently doing to what you need them to be doing. And crucially, you need to eliminate waste, because what you don't want is unwieldy processes now becoming unwieldy processes once they've been diverted. So the processes need to be streamlined, and that's what we're going to talk about, what I'm going to talk about this afternoon. So this talk really is based around lean principles, which originated in Toyota in the manufacturing environment, and is fundamentally about, as I said, waste. So the definition of waste in this environment is anything that doesn't add value to the customer. So that's anything they're not willing to pay for. So there's no point painting a widget red if actually the customer doesn't care whether it's natural color or not. What adds value, is anything that meets a customer requirement. So if the customer says they want it to be red, fair enough, and that cannot be performed more economically. Typically, historically, there have been 7 types of waste identified within this lean principles: defects, transport, inventory, waiting, overproduction, motion, and overprocessing. And more recently, there's been the addition of an 8th type of waste, which is basically waste of human potential. So just to talk about those wastes in a little bit more detail. Obviously, these are easier to picture within a manufacturing environment. At least they are for me, but then I've got a manufacturing background. But they're applicable to any industry, any organization. Defects is kind of your obvious waste, really. That's, if you're in a factory, that's what's in a skip out the back. So it's stuff that doesn't meet the grade for whatever reason. But within an office, it could be, for example, entering information incorrectly. Transport is moving material or paperwork around unnecessarily, or in fact any movement. What it should do is move from one stage to the next as seamlessly as possible. The ongoing processes should be as near as possible to each other. Inventory, that's stocks of raw materials, finished goods, or work in progress, which has tied up the cash because you've spent it to get it to that stage, and you've actually tied up the time that's been spent to get it there. In a office type environment, service environment, possibly a comparison would be an in tray of forms that aren't going to be processed until a certain number has been reached. Waiting is waiting for responses from other departments. Overproduction, obviously making more of something than you actually need or than has actually been ordered, but also producing more parts before the next stage can receive them. So producing them too early and then they're going to stick in inventory. Motion is excessive movement of people or machines. So for example, searching for materials or tools or handoffs. And over-processing, finally, is adding more than the customer actually requires. So, for example, if you had a tolerance that was far tighter than actually required, that would be an example of over-processing. Entering data more than once would similarly be over-processing. So from that, you can see that obviously your waste is costing you money and you want to eliminate it as far as possible. And the way you do that is by mapping the process flow. So the next few slides, I'm going to talk about an internal wall insulation manufacturer. So what this is, you can see a exploded diagram of it on the screen. What it is it's a bespoke made-to-measure system that sits completely independently of the existing wall that you're insulating. And it has a number of benefits, such as it's quick to install, it doesn't need plastering, etc., etc. But it needs to fit. And as I say, it's bespoke. It's done, a survey is done for every wall. And then those panels are then designed to fit that wall. So from a high level point of view, it looks fairly straightforward. Order received, design, production. But you get the real benefit from the process flow mapping when you start to drill down. So the order's received. The order's entered onto the system. Somebody then checks that we've got the raw material to make it. They check what the factory are doing at the moment. Are they busy? Can they slot it in? And then a delivery date is agreed both with the factory and with the customer. The delivery date's put onto the whiteboard so that everybody can see, has a visual reminder of what's due out and when. The order acknowledgement is printed off the system and sent to the customer. The manager's master spreadsheet is updated so they can see which quotes have been converted and monitor the overall process, and then the instructions given to the design department. Once it hits the design department, the designer has to enter the survey drawings onto the CAD system, applying the rules that have been agreed. They need to create and print the production drawings. And then those production drawings are checked by a third person against the surveys. The survey dimensions are then entered onto a separate spreadsheet and parts lists are then printed off. The production drawings and the parts lists are both then issued to the factory. Once it's in the factory, as I said, it's easier to picture the various points where waste occurs in a factory, at least it is to me. So you move the raw materials to the saw, you cut all the panels to size, you check them. You move those panels to the routers, you profile them, you check them. They're moved again, they've got foil put onto the back of them and the feet added to the bottom and to the sides where appropriate, and they're checked. They're then moved, the whole lot is moved and laid out on the floor, so it looks like a wall, but horizontally, and it's checked. All the ancillary parts are collected together and checked. And finally, it's all brought together in one place. It's put on a pallet, which is a great big pallet, obviously, it's 3 meters long. It's wrapped and we've got a final QC check there. So I think it's quite obvious from those examples that there's an awful lot of waste in that system that I've just described. So how do we go about eliminating it? Some of it's easy and some of it's less so. You need to question all the assumptions. You need to ask what would happen if we stopped doing this. Utilize the 5 whys so you can really understand the justification for doing something and assess whether that justification is valid or not. Reject the "we've always done it this way" because whilst it might be true, that's not logically valid. Identify the knee-jerk processes. So for example, in what I was just describing, the third person check of the design against the survey was because there was one incident where that drawing was incorrect against the survey. So a whole new step was put in for every single order. And recognize people's safety blankets. So again, in the example I've just given, the manager's spreadsheet, that was mine. And I was absolutely wedded to my spreadsheet because it allowed me to see what was going on. So you've got to understand that sometimes people are going to be very reluctant to give things up and certainly will want something suitable in place before they do so. Finally, you've got to accept that some process may be necessary waste. So in the example in the factory, all those QC checks, those were required of us by a third-party external accreditation body. So we have to accept that we have to do those, even though they're adding no value. But what we did manage to agree was a very, very simple means of doing it, with literally on the panel drawings, they would be dotted with a blue pen and ticked with a green pen at various stages so that we'd know that every bit of it had been checked, but without creating extra paperwork. So my next example, just to demonstrate what I was saying, that it's applicable anywhere, housing association repairs process. So what happened? The resident rang the housing association to report the repair. Housing association then classify that repair according to Welsh Government guidelines. So it's either emergency, urgent, or routine, and each of those categories has a different repair time standard. The information gets entered onto the system. They decide if a surveyor's visit is required in order, if it's a more complicated or looks like it might be a more complicated issue, does a surveyor need to go and visit first? If so, that adds just a whole new loop. But let's assume not. The housing association rings the relevant contractor and passes on the customer details and the details of the repair. The contractor will then ring or write to the resident to arrange the appointment and then inform the housing association of the details. And then the housing association updates the system. The appointment's kept, or maybe it's not, because an appointment has been made, but the resident isn't necessarily going to be available then. The repair's completed, or it's not, because it needed a different trade, an additional trade, or parts that weren't available. Eventually it does get done, the system's updated, and then the mandatory reporting is done. So this is the bit where you report on the target times for each category of repair. And it very much, to my mind, demonstrates you get what you measure. So the system was all based around those external targets, but nobody had ever questioned whether those external targets were valid. Nobody had actually said, is this what matters to the customer? So what might be classified as an emergency in an office somewhere might not be an emergency to that particular tenant. Similarly, a routine might be particularly important to somebody else. So it was very much about saying that, okay, those targets don't add anything. And what we need to do, what's value for the customer, is being able to get an appointment when they want it. So we got a special dispensation, in fact, from the Welsh Government to measure customer satisfaction instead. And the way we did that, we didn't give them a form of, did the guy wear his top that showed the customer, the contractor he was coming from? Did they knock politely? Did they X, Y, Z? What we said, all we did was, okay, rate the service you've required and how would you improve it? In other words, we didn't dictate what they should be concerned about. And then what also happened, the contractor, some of the contractor admin staff came and worked within the housing association as part of the customer service team. And then between them, that team then booked in the contractors when the initial call was made. So obviously that's much better for the resident. And finally, the contractors introduced van stock requirements for their guys based on an assessment of typical repairs that had been done over a period. And also, and again, importantly, the guys were allowed to go and buy stuff from, for example, Travis Perkins. They were given cards that they could just go and use up to a certain value, of course, because there's always going to be checks and balances. But they were, rather than what had happened in the past, which was they would report it back Somebody would go and order it, it would come in, they'd make another appointment, yada yada. They could actually just go there and then, if there was if there was somewhere convenient, get what they needed and fit it. So all those things basically reduced an awful lot of waste out of that system and produced a much more beneficial repair surface. So some other areas within lean principles, things to think about. Stock levels. What are the stock levels you actually need? Can you get stuff just in time? Because that will improve your the stock levels of raw materials. Can you dispatch just in time so you don't have to keep raw material finished goods? Kanban systems, so which helps with the stock. So you have a set level of stock, and once it dips, then you reorder, but not until that point. Standardize your processes so everything happens the same way all the time. Look at your batch sizes. So back to what I was talking about, the in tray with they're going to wait until they've got a certain number of documents before they process it. Actually, the holy grail of lean principles is single piece flow. So everything is touched once and only once at each stage in the process, and it flows directly from one stage to the next, with no waiting, no stock, no nothing in between. So to summarize, what I'm suggesting is that to build operational resilience, you need to streamline your processes, you need to remove the waste as far as possible, and then is the right time to introduce the tech, because otherwise you're running the risk of building in the inefficiencies, and also you're going to be potentially paying for tech solutions to something that you could actually manage out. So you're wasting money in that respect. And that's me done.
We have some time for questions, Jill.
Okay.
Chris, has there been any questions on the, okay, no questions, so we'll carry on and people can ask us the Q&A, ask us questions at the end.
Sure.
Okay, so carrying on from Jill, I'm Steph. This is me at last year's Emerging Tech Fest. I too have a kind of a manufacturing focus, but more on the technology side to help people improve the way they do things, to take a data-driven approach where we look and quantify the waste and be able to start making decisions based off of it. Here at Nightingale HQ, we primarily focus on manufacturers, but we're very much focused on helping them become more digitally capable and use technology to be able to improve the way they do things. And this is a journey that never finishes. And it's not about where you start. You don't have to feel terrible because you're just using a Google Sheet. It's about how you end up. The search for excellence and reducing waste and becoming more resilient is the mindset. It's not about being resilient just now. And in fact, COVID-19 showed us that many businesses that we thought of as resilient weren't resilient in all dimensions. They were still hit in different ways that were unexpected. The trick is to change sufficiently well in an appropriate direction to become more resilient to that type of change in future. So as Jill said, when we're thinking about processes and we're thinking about improving them, we first of all think about where our biggest waste points and problems are, which ones are the highest value for solving. You draw them out, you start thinking about the processes, you discuss them, think about how you can improve them, and then you go and improve them, which is easier said than done. Particularly if you're thinking about the tech piece, you might not be very up to speed on how technology can help you, and you might not necessarily have the skills to go and actually do that implementation yourself. So this is where we're going to spend a lot of my presentation on, is how do we unpack that make it so piece and that implementation of tech to support your operational resilience without it being overwhelming. So another kind of step-by-step diagram, you're thinking about what you're trying to achieve. You think about the right route to do so. And then the first thing to think about is the skills that you have to deliver it. So in Jill's example of her safety blanket spreadsheet, a lot of that data was on the system. So if somebody had the right internal skills, instead of the spreadsheet, they could have built a report over the scheduling system. But if nobody had the skills in-house to do that, the spreadsheet might be an okay trade-off. You also need to think about compliance before you go do things. Brexit has left a lot of legislative uncertainty for us, but fundamentally we should still be protecting people's data. You might work in protecting people and meeting all your insurance obligations and various bits and pieces. You might also be in a highly regulated environment and have extra things that you need to do. So once you have the requirements for what you'd like to achieve, you think about who's going to achieve it. You set out any requirements that the technology must meet from a compliance perspective, and then you can think of the tech to solve the problem. You should then prototype it. Don't go all in, because that really puts you in a position where you can't change easily and you overinvest. So try something out a little bit, see how it works, gather feedback, improve it. And then once it's working well on a small scale, you can then scale it out so that it is used for all of that situation. By doing it this way, you have many different points at which you can stop in this process to say, this isn't working for us. If a requirement changes, you can iterate. If technology is no longer compliant, you can move forward a bit faster. So step by step, thinking always about what meets your needs and what is the kind of the quickest way to achieve some or all of those needs. So as an example, we've just been working with a Welsh logistics company, and they don't have enough time. So they are rapidly growing, and they've just been needing to sort out all of the customs different pieces, and they're swamped. So they started looking at their processes and identified that one of their key areas of waste was actually the keeping of spreadsheets. They had an online system, they put deliveries through, but it was hard for them to understand how their entire business was working. So everybody had to log all the deliveries, not just on their system, but on their spreadsheets. So after they had a goal of freeing up time, they came up with an idea. What if we use our online data rather than our Google Sheets data? They looked at who can deliver that internally, but they only had a single person who was already really busy trying to do all the reporting for all their customers and all the other things. So they decided to talk to us so that we can be the extra resource to help deliver this for them. We looked at their requirements with them from a compliance perspective of, let's keep all the data in the UK, let's make sure that there's proper access controls. And of course, we had other requirements like, let's keep it as cheap as possible and let's keep it as up to date as possible. So we looked at technology, and we looked at the cloud so that they didn't have to invest as much money up front in hardware. So we have a database in the cloud, and we connect to their system, their real-time system that they use to be able to extract data and be able to work with it. We prototyped first by talking to their online system to get some data and produced a sample report. They were able to see what type of data they could get, compare it against their spreadsheet, and be able to say, yes, I can get insight from that. Once we'd worked on the prototype, we then started building the data integration to get the data from that system so that we can start combining it with other things. Now they're using that, making sure that they see how it works, working out whether they can turn off different spreadsheets. And as we go forward with them, we can incorporate more data so that they start getting a complete view of their organization without people having to spend all of that time on putting it together. So it's a step-by-step process. You think, you plan, you prototype, you iterate. And we do this on a bigger basis for our customers who are thinking about using artificial intelligence. So we always start off with the business goals. There's no point in doing anything if it doesn't add value. You prioritize, you think about your capabilities. Then, as you're thinking about a first project to solve problems, there's a bunch of different areas that you might find you have to start becoming more resilient and more capable in to be to effectively deliver value inside your organization. So for AI, key thing is strategy. Where are you going? Why are you going there? And what do you need to get there? Governance is often important. How are you going to manage it from a compliance perspective? Where are you getting information from? How can you view your business? Do people trust their data? Do they experiment? Are they willing to try new technologies? And do they have the critical infrastructure in place for things to work? So quite often a project which might be driven by a need to adopt some technology is actually hitting a lot of business areas before a tech project can be successful. So once we've identified these areas and we run a single project, we think about it, we build an action plan, we pilot it, prototype it, we learn from it, and we iterate. So that smaller scale process gets writ large and repeats across individual projects and across initiatives, because that feedback, that ability to change quickly, even on the technology front, is the bit that makes you resilient when things external to your organization change. So Winston Churchill said, to improve is to change, to be perfect is to change often. So this is the thing that really we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about our processes and the technology to support them, is how can we get better at being able to change effectively? Because that's what to reduce waste, you have to change. So that's where we need to always be thinking, always be capable of changing to be able to improve. And tech is hard. Not everyone has, like an IT team. Most small businesses don't. But according to Small Business Britain, more than half of businesses have increased their digital skills and added new technology because of the pandemic. So many of us have had to start working remotely or had to do contactless delivery, change our business to work with online sales. There's been so much disruption, but more than 75% of the businesses that have increased their tech have said that it's helped them. It's made their business better. So we can use digital and tech to help us scale and improve and change. But how we get there can vary based on the size of your business, the type of the business, and so on. So I can't give you the full, it depends, custom to your business set of advice. But what I can do is help you kind of, at your size of organization, think about some easy steps to success. So if you're a small business, you do not have the time to build your own IT infrastructure. You should buy all the things. Buy Office 365, buy a CRM, online, don't hold any hardware, just buy the capability. There is often a technology to help you with anything that you're trying to achieve. So if you're not aware of them, you probably need to spend a bit of time getting digitally savvy. So learn about the cloud and software as a service and different ways of working with data and things like that. And I'd say the first thing that you should focus on is actually helping your people be more productive at what they're doing. So cut out the time they spend on waste and help them spend more time on the things that add value to your business. That's the first step, because the people, every single person in your business is the most critical part of it for your success. At the next size up, as a medium-sized organization, now is the time to start thinking about parts of your business that are the most valuable and thinking about how technology can really help you improve that intellectual property. If it's a novel wall insulation capability with surveys and CAD, perhaps there is an improved software process that you can use, maybe like augmented reality, to speed up the surveys. Start thinking about how you go from being a medium-sized organization to a big organization by building that capability. You now have usually a bit more money than a small organization. There are many experts out there who can act as an external center of excellence to help drive digital adoption inside your business. So you can use external people, partners, to help positively influence your teams. And you should definitely start thinking about how you can be slashing waste out of your processes. So as a small business, it's about enabling your people to do more. That's generally the case for a medium business, but you also need to start thinking about all the increased processes that connect people and ways of doing things together, because everything gets more complex the bigger you get. And then finally, as a larger organization, you can start being more cutting edge. What projects can you do to help you meet upcoming requirements that might be unclear, and how can you be disruptive before you to yourself before you get externally disrupted? How do you make your supply chains more resilient in the face of a pandemic? Some organizations were working on this and have done very well because they weren't hit from a direction that was unanticipated. To be able to keep improving your organization and allowing people to improve the way they do things, you should be making sure that people understand digital and data concepts. People should be comfortable with spreadsheets. They should be comfortable working online. They should understand how they can improve processes for themselves. And then the final focus is improving the speed and quality of processes. So after you've done a waste reduction process, how can you improve that new lean process to work more quickly with fewer problems? So that's our kind of like steps of focus. And I want to introduce you to the concept of DevOps. So inside IT, we often have these like ideas of developers and software engineers. So a developer is somebody who does tech, who writes code, but a software engineer is somebody who does that with a strong focus on quality and robustness. With DevOps, we've taken a lot of the principles from manufacturing and tried to combine them so that almost everyone acts as a software engineer, reducing the waste in their process, reducing the quality of their work, and improving the speed at which they deliver value. Now, as a small business, you might not have any IT people, and you might be wondering why DevOps is important, but you can apply this to your organization. That mindset of how can I learn from other people to improve my way of doing things? How can I take a concept like Kanban and make sure that my staff do their daily tasks? So learn from others and change the way you do things, because other people have already gone through the pain of improving things. So that's what's happening in the IT world, is we're taking ideas from manufacturing to improve how we produce digital software. So I know I've quoted The Rock and Winston Churchill and all sorts of cool people, but for me, I personally think that your organizational resilience comes from enabling people to make changes when they encounter things that aren't working or when things can be made better. If you micromanage, if you protect everything so nobody can make any changes, then your organization becomes brittle. So enabling people inside your organization is about being digitally savvy, about that data and digital literacy. And it might be some investment in some tools to help them. So focusing in on your people, on helping them do things more effectively, we can start looking at software to help improve those processes. So one of the areas is online collaboration. You've all probably had a Zoom call with your family and like a cocktail hour or something by now, but actually we can be using online collaboration tools like online Word documents and spreadsheets and meeting technologies to be able to work in a distributed way that works on site as well as it does inside the home. It doesn't cost a lot, but is really valuable for reducing the impact of a dispersed workforce. And another area that you can be investing in is no-code apps. How can people make a little data entry app to make it easier to take inventory instead of them having to go back and forth a big master spreadsheets? So no-code apps, there's ones available from Microsoft. It's a whole burgeoning industry, space and technology. But you can be investing in things that don't require any IT people, but can really help your staff be more productive day to day. You then want them to start being able to understand the processes and how they impact things. So what are your critical measures? Where is the time going? How many fraud case, like how many returns did you get? how many people did a chargeback on your online payment provider last year? So being able to see the data inside your business and be able to understand it to make decisions about where problems are in the business is critical. So you can do self-service tools like Power BI. Excel is pretty sweet these days. You know, you can get it to talk to your MailChimp, your CRM systems, you name it, you can probably get data from it in Excel. And finally, SaaS tools. So if you're using Google Analytics, get better at using it. Help make sure that you know where people inside your website flow are not kind of making it through to the next step. And then finally, think about how you can improve your processes. So we're a small business. We use a platform, Charlie HR, to manage our HR processes. It will do automated emails for holiday approval and keep track. And the SaaS tool has a report view and tells us when people haven't taken enough holiday, for instance. You can also start equipping people to be able to do things with processes in an automated way once you've made sure that the process is correct without needing to write any code. You have to be digitally savvy. You do not have to be code savvy to automate things. So there's platforms like Zapier, Microsoft Power Automate that you can write programs without needing to program to be able to automate stuff. And similarly, you can do it with marketing. So particularly small businesses, we're really spending a lot of time on making the business work. We only grow when we get new people to buy our stuff, but we don't necessarily have the time for it. So marketing automation tools, things that like capture the Twitter mentions, that respond to queries on Facebook. These kind of things can really help you improve your business. And they can help your staff make the changes without you needing to do all the things or invest a lot in IT spend. We've been working through an Innovate UK funding to try and help businesses do some of these things. So we've had a lot of lessons learned on this. One of them being that a lot of people in small businesses find it quite difficult to get on the cloud. So if any of you want to consider using no-code automation tools and things like that, and get a bit serious about using cloud computing platforms like Azure, do get in touch. But we have some ways that you can press a few buttons and get chatbots, for instance. We're working on one at the moment that will automatically process invoices for you when they hit your inbox. So all of this is really about aligning how you think about tech to your processes so that you never stand still. The only way to not break is to be able to flex, grow, and change. So I wanted to leave you on a high note. I'm going to talk about some cases from COVID that happened during COVID of businesses that changed quickly. So Irish business Combi-Lift, they made fork trucks, right? Within only a month or two of COVID hitting, they were producing ventilators. They were able to take their manufacturing process along with their software skills and R&D skills to be able to start producing a new product. Brewdog, who doesn't like beer? They also made hand sanitizer during COVID. So they were able to repurpose their manufacturing process to combine the different ingredients needed to be able to make hand sanitizer and ship it to the NHS. So they had to very quickly think about their existing process, a new process, and how to map one to the other and be able to make the appropriate changes, like helping their staff move from a manufacturing role to a packing or supply chain role. And finally, Bauer Sports Equipment make great skates and stuff like that. They were able to change their process within a day or two to be able to make single-use PPE items to be able to ship to hospitals. They were able to make 300,000 quickly and started sharing their design and working with their existing manufacturing partners and other people to be able to scale the effort. So they didn't just change their internal process, but they changed the way they operated in their space to grow, to change their supply chain and how they interacted with people to deliver a new product that helped save lives. So thank you all very much for coming today. Hopefully we've given you some great food for thought on how you can make your organization more robust, more resilient. Jill and I have time for questions. Please ask them to us. You can also get in touch with us to follow up on any of the points that we've said so far. Thank you all very much. Jill, how open are manufacturers to changing their processes? How can we change the mindset to, for process improvements before something goes wrong?
I think it very much depends on how established their processes are, how comfortable they are in their industries. Obviously, you get complacency, and that's probably the biggest thing that you're up against. Like I say, there's this whole, we've always done it this way. There's the safety blanket, there's the knee-jerk reaction, but potentially, it very much depends on the manufacturer. Will be the answer. You know, some people are much more open to it than others.
Cool. Another question: if people haven't done any process mapping before and they need to start thinking about their business and mapping their processes, how would you recommend they get started?
I would literally do kind of what I did in the presentation. So a very high level, this happens, then this happens, then this happens. So you've got the overall picture, but then really drill down and say, what happens at each stage? So at this point, and you need to be quite very granular about it. So it can seem a bit daunting, but actually Jeff puts this into this spreadsheet and then Bill does this with it, but be that granular.
And do you have any kind of words of wisdom for where people can typically find the most waste inside their organization to get rid of?
Again, it's very much dependent on the type of organization, but I think there is a lot of, I may have determined a new waste category here, which is safety blanket waste. I think there's an awful lot of that that you can get rid of. Certainly within manufacturing, stocks is the absolute. Most manufacturing businesses will have looked at least at their reject rates, you know, their physical reject rates, stuff they're putting in the skip. But it's the amount that's tied up of time and money that's tied up in stock is probably, for manufacturing at least, I would think that's probably the biggest areas to go at.
And that's probably very true for inventory, food and beverages, all sorts of organizations, right? Because we all have to, unless you're a pure software business, you all have stock of some stuff.
Yeah. And of course, there's always the motivation to have more than you need because of bulk buying. So, what we would do in our own homes is also true in the, the stationery website, where if you buy a bit more, but you don't need to.
That's how people end up with 10,000 business cards.
Absolutely. And then that adds additional waste because the pen that you want is behind all those 10,000 business cards. So you've got to move them and then move them back. So.
Yeah, I do like what you're saying about the safety blanket waste. It is an area that I see a lot. And that knee-jerk processes, like I remember seeing a sprinkler which said, "This is not a coat hanger." Somebody actually had to machine onto sprinkler parts, "This is not a coat hanger," because
Right.
of so many people using them in hotels inappropriately. And that manual data capture, because people don't trust the systems, or they maybe don't trust people to enter it correctly once, and they're worried about corrupted data. All of that extra oversight, really, that's where a lot of it comes in, and it's all for that psychological safety.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that mindset shift is a really important part to the operational resilience of we have to be internally resilient.
Absolutely. And I know this theory. I understand the principles behind it, but I would have fought tooth and nail to keep my spreadsheet because it gave me that security I needed.
What's the phrase? Builders' houses.
Yes.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
Another question has come in for me about how do we encourage people to use technology that is good for them? Coming back to that psychological safety, I think we've had a really big, over the decades, that if you press the wrong button, technology is dangerous. Like if you hit cut rather than copy, then your stuff disappears. And people have got really, this is the process I know to achieve my goal. It might not be the most optimal process, but it works. And they do that with technology. And I don't know about this new tech. This Rolodex I have is perfect for keeping my contacts. I don't need anything else, right?
Yeah.
And it really is just that there's such a big mindset and kind of psychological piece that you have to really address around it being okay to experiment with technology and being able to accept failure. Not every piece of tech is going to work. Not every project is going to succeed. But we really need to be willing to try. We cannot improve if we don't test.
Very true.
Great. That's all the questions we have. Thank you very much, Jill, for co-presenting with me. And Chris, I believe over to you.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much for attending. I'm just going to share our outro video. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Thank you for joining the Emerging Tech Fest. Join us again on our virtual live sessions or watch us on playback anytime, anywhere.